from Stephen Chow.
Well, thank you. In keeping with our theme of looking back from 2065, one of our first realizations was that the exhortation that much of the effort we need to put into reducing the rates and impacts of environmental change should come from the humanities and social sciences wasn't given sufficient attention to. We knew enough about the natural sciences to understand the change that was coming, but yet we didn't know enough about how we should address it, and so we sit with elevated rates of change. There were three key items that we really didn't get on top of in the intervening period. The first was that our resource use intensity was going up and we weren't addressing that quickly enough. We were interested in consuming yet more protein derived from meat or fish products. We were also interested in having additional electronic devices. So much as our battery technology improved, we still had a much greater energy use intensity. We coupled that with rising populations and, of course, the natural need to ensure that everyone lived a life that was well within their means and the means they could access. The second point was we didn't listen to the statement that said there's something called the extinction of experience. Early in the 2000s, a natural scientist said, we're losing our connection to the natural world. There are many people that have no concept of what wilderness or natural areas means, and that might have an enormous impact on how we formulate our conservation policies and environmental use policies into the future. We paid little attention to that extinction of experience, and we've seen it play out. In addition, we had a fisheries biologist turn around and say to us, we also have something called shifting baselines. In other words, what we even conceive of natural for those who are still interested in the natural world has changed incredibly. In other words, what we now think is the beautiful outdoors is a beautiful outdoors dominated by species that come from just about everywhere. So in consequence, we now face an environment in Antarctica that is extremely different. To begin with, we do have huge numbers of people visiting. We have very much increased rates of scientific endeavor because it's one of the few areas left where you can actually pretend, at least, that you're still researching the natural environment. We have people visiting the continent in ever-increasing numbers because it's still the only environment that remains fairly natural over many parts of it. There's ice left in many places, there's adventure tourism, there's fly-ins to experience what it's like to have snow. We have, as a consequence, movement between areas in Antarctica. We have regular transfer across a continent that everyone has forgotten is the size of the continental USA. So much as we now have very increased technologies in the genomics area where we can remotely sense DNA sequences and the functioning of various genes, we're not sure anymore which organisms belonged in which places and whether in fact this is a reflection of adaptation or human movement of organisms across the continent. In some places, such as the peninsula, we have novel ecosystems. So we have golf course grasses growing very well, Poa annua established and widely spread, now being used for a small tourism operation that offers golf in Antarctica. We have rodents as a major problem in the stations because winter temperatures have been increasing so fast in the peninsula area that in fact it's no longer very difficult for these animals to survive. Biosecurity is not a question any longer for us because we've forgotten really what it is to have a world that's in a semi-natural state that we're trying to keep that way. And after all, we haven't yet got to agriculture or large-scale growth of any resources on land. And so if the environment is changing, it actually seems just to be changing for the better because after all, everywhere else is the same. In consequence, some of our earlier failures have been used as a tool to change the arrangements under which we govern Antarctica. So we look back with envy at the Antarctic Treaty System and its Committee for Environmental Protection. And we're in a position where, as we led up to 2048 and the ability to decide whether we wish to keep the environmental protocol, we saw increasing emphasis on a different set of arrangements. a set of arrangements that would be more convenient to a world where we needed further resources and where we were less concerned about the natural world and conserving it. And so, in consequence, we now sit with a situation where our science is still well funded, but in essence, we're trying to understand novel ecosystems and working out our ecological theories using these new systems. We're also in a position where much of our science is directed towards how we're going to cope with increasing energy intensity and how we use Antarctica to do so. So ecologists are being called on for environmental impact assessments of a very different kind in the Antarctic. Looking back, we think that had we, at our first set of decisions about what we should do, our first Martha Muse colloquium and our first horizon scan, we think we should have identified this as a major area of investigation. How do we encourage the rest of the world outside of Antarctica to change its behavior, to reduce the rates and impacts of environmental change drivers? Thank you.